Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. It's July the 25th, and still Gaza continues to suffer from famine and starvation. I'll repeat it again. The aid is waiting at the various border gates. It is being blocked purposefully by Israel. The question we ask ourselves is, what is the international community going to do? As we stand right now, France says they're ready to recognize Palestine. But on the other side of the coin, are they willing to go ahead and put the criticism on Israel for its continuous blockade and bombardment of Gaza as the genocide goes and takes its turn for the worse? Today, my guest for the entire show is Rula Shadid, who's the co-founder of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. In this role, she leads strategic advocacy efforts and supports Palestine's international diplomacy initiatives. She joins me on Zoom from Brussels in Belgium. Rula, absolute pleasure having you on. Shukran so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I think, Rula, since October the 7th, 2023, your role has become not just challenging, but emotionally challenging also at the same time. Talk to us about that, especially given that you hold these two master's degrees in human rights and international humanitarian law. And here we are in July 2025 asking ourselves, where are we when it comes to that?
Well, you're absolutely right. We are facing a situation of extreme collapse. And as you just mentioned, having a jurist degree, it's fascinating to see how the world and how politicized the legal aspects of and the legal tools that we have, to a degree where we actually have been saying for several times now, there is a collapse in the system. And I don't understand if people actually grasp what that means. It means we are living in an era where every state feels, specifically, of course, the powerful states that are backed and supported unconditionally by the global minority, I would say, specifically the United States and Europe, to continue with crossing every red line that the world have come to acknowledge since World War II, when actually all these human rights declarations that are supposed to be non-derogable have been adopted. So yes, it is alarming, but at the same time, I do see a change. I do see an opportunity. And that's what we are hoping and working for at the Institute, but also in the movement which we are part of.
Yeah, of course, and I will be touching on the Hague Group later on in this discussion. You know, Rula, I want to toss your man back to December the 29th, 2023, when, of course, South Africa launches the ICJ case against Israel. You know, for a global South country, this is unprecedented, because one would have expected either somebody from the Middle East or even an inkling of a European nation to say, look, what Israel is doing since October the 7th constitutes genocide and, of course, crimes against humanity. When South Africa brought that, and when, of course, you heard the deliberations that were, of course, being mentioned in January 2024, and then, of course, at the end of that month, you hear that there is a plausible case of genocide that could be brought. Even though international law has really been under such a huge microscope, did that give you hope as an international law practitioner that surely there could be that small ray of light at the end of the tunnel, given what had been mentioned by those bench of judges on that day?
So before I answer the question of hope that was brought and the great effort that the South Africans and the South African government, of course, supported by the South African people, our brothers and sisters in South Africa, I would love to address your comment on we would have imagined that an Arab country or an Arab Arab-speaking country would do this. And it is important, I think, also to the South African to try to understand that, unfortunately, what we're seeing in the Arab region or in the Arab-speaking world is these governments that we have around us, unfortunately, are governments that are complicit, are governments that in the most situations are authoritarian, dictators, unfortunately, that have suppressed their own people, even in demonstrations in support of Palestine and Palestinians against the genocide of the Israeli colonial state. And this is very important for people to understand, because I do receive that question a lot. So how come you're asking South Africa to act while the Arab countries, unfortunately, are not? And I think it's important to understand that authoritarianism, many people are sitting today in jails in those countries, specifically as political prisoners in the surrounding countries around us, and not allowed to be not allowed to act. We see that in Egypt, we see that in Jordan, of course, as you have seen, also Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. These are all countries that are also facing the colonial interest of the Israeli state and the Israeli colonial regime, because that is what the intention of the Israeli aspiration is in Palestine and in the region. So it's important to realize that. Now, in relation to your question about did that give us hope? Look, I think the international law, international criminal law, and the biggest court in the world to have in an almost consensus in its decision to say that it is a plausible genocide means a lot in terms of law. Of course, it helps because it does, as you said, mentions a precedent, and it is also very much helpful in the advocacy efforts that we are doing around the world, convincing states to actually abide by their obligations. So the decisions that we see from the courts, not only the ICJ opinions and the preventive measures, but also the advisory opinion on the ending of the occupation, which should happen in 2 months from now, as you remember, and also the ICC arrest warrants against war criminals of the Israeli state. It is important, and it does give us a momentum, and it does give us a backbone when we are speaking to states that are actually willing to take steps, but needs to understand more how do they abide by international law. So these are the main hopeful situations, that it is, again, a tool that we can use to move forward states to actually take into consideration and actually apply energy and arms embargo, to actually apply sanctions towards the state of Israel, because these are the only steps that would actually stop the genocide.
Rula, one final question before we go to the break. You mentioned the ICC, you of course mentioned the advisory opinion, of course, from the ICJ that apartheid is being committed, especially in the occupied West Bank, and let's not forget Gaza. And then, of course, 2 months after that, the ICC issues these arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and yet you're getting threats from the United States saying that, listen, we're going to apply sanctions on its chief prosecutor, Karim Khan. And then, of course, mentioning that these ICC arrest warrants mean absolutely nothing. And then, of course, you hear the far right within the Israeli cabinet, and we're going to speak on them quite a lot, mentioning this as quote-unquote anti-Semitic. Of course, some would take that as a pinch of salt, but the fact that it's coming from a giant in the US, and one must not forget that they hold such a powerful position within the UN Security Council, that is the concern, isn't it? Even though the consensus around the world is really moving closer to that of its solidarity and unification for Palestine.
So that is exactly what we mean when we say that there is a world order collapse. When we see that hegemonic states, specifically governments and specific individuals as well, that of course reflects a system, they're not operating by themselves, are taking decisions that shows total disrespect and total carelessness towards the entire world, the entire efforts of the world, producing for ages and years laws and precedents and decisions and resolutions that are not being respected. So this does show us that, you know, if one state can dictate and can act as a group of mafia, dictating to states, interfering in the sovereignty of states, pressuring and threatening with tariffs, with sanctions, with cutting support, with taking to courts, like also what we saw with the special rapporteur of the Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese. That shows us that we are in a very dangerous situation where democracy is very much questioned. Is this the democracy that the West has been trying to export to us, quote unquote, the uncivilized people? Well, indeed, it is not. And indeed, today, this is another yet opportunity to see that there needs to be another parallel system that is actually emerging in the global South again and in the global majority to stop this insanity, because apparently and very obviously it is not working and needs to be changed.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Rula Shadid. We'll be touching on the impunity that Israel has enjoyed, not just now since October the 7th, 2023, but from the start of the Nakba in 1948. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with Rula Shadid, the co-director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. Rula, you know, somebody that you know quite well, Dr. Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territory. You know, she quoted by saying that the impunity that Israel enjoys is fueled by the United States and the West. And it's quite clear, isn't it? But this is not something that had started since October the 7th, 2023, or the second or the first Intifada. This is something that was seen since 1948. One could even look pre-1948, of course, when the Balfour Declaration had occurred. And it's quite telling, isn't it, that this impunity can only be done when, of course, your partners, which are specifically the West, are allowing this to happen and happen at such a rapid pace?
Well, look, I don't think they're only partners. They are part of the colonial project in Palestine and in the region. So it is not only impunity. It is a project that that is fueled and that cannot exist without the decision, basically, not just the support, the decision of the United States, whether it is in the early 40s until we saw the ethnic cleansing of over 75 to 80% of our people in April, May 1948, or until this day, where we see a continuous support for a state that is committing one of the most heinous crimes in our human history. So yes, I would say that these states and the way Israel has been treated makes it even more evident that Israel is not alone. Actually, in fact, since the second week of the beginning of the attacks on Gaza and the genocide on Gaza, Israel did ask for immediate support from the United States. And if they did not get unlimited military support and unlimited political, economic, and media support, it wouldn't have been able to continue the genocide. So we're speaking about a double-folded attack on Palestinians. And that is very also important for the world to understand, that the Palestinians in Gaza, in Palestine, in Jerusalem in 1948, in the West Bank, they're not only facing, and also, of course, in diaspora, our people in exile, we are facing the hegemony of the world. We're facing the United States. We're facing the big corporations against us. We're facing the media complicity. We're facing the European support to the government, the colonial government of Israel. And we're also seeing that they are not adhering to their own so-called democratic procedures and constitutional rights and liberties, because we see that the streets are very clear and loud about stopping the genocide, about not continuing to be complicit. But yet those governments, again claiming democracy, have chosen to stay and stand with the genocidal states, of course, instead of listening to their own people. So, as I said, it all refers back to a world order collapse and a world order where everything needs to be evaluated and everything needs to put in its place.
Rula, I want to touch on the West Bank, and of course, you studied in Jenin at the Arab American University, and I know it's a place that you hold dear to your heart, like as Palestine as a whole. Also, this annexation from the Knesset, which gave them the full powers to go ahead and annex the West Bank. And we speak about, obviously, the Nakba, and we look at the ethnic cleansing that is happening, of course, in Gaza. One cannot ignore what's happening in the West Bank. I've been speaking to so many people from that area. I had a panel discussion on Wednesday on one of my shows called Talking Point. And in Ramallah, I mean, there's no real guarantee that if they walk out, they're going to come back home alive. This annexation, which the Knesset did, again, it's impunity that is on the highest level, and it's being done so by the thumbs up given by the United States and European nations, despite, and I'm going to mention the two names, and two names that you know quite well, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who continue to make sure that their plans, and of course given by Netanyahu himself, to allow for this annexation to continue within the West Bank.
The annexation, as you rightly said, did not just start. The annexation has been the colonial plan, and it is not separable of what has been happening in Palestine for the past 77 years of the colonization of Palestine. There is a big interest of the colonial state to further their control on the West Bank, on the natural resources, on the land, and expel the Palestinians, if not by displacing them and ethnically cleansing them, then by killing them, as what we are seeing in the genocide in Gaza. So yes, the situation, I would say, I wouldn't fragment what is happening in Palestine. So basically, the entire Palestinian existence on the Palestinian land, or what's so-called the historic Palestine, is very clear to us. There is attacks, systematic, different ways of attacks and different ways of managing and showing dominance on our people, whether they are living in Haifa, in Yafa, in Jerusalem, in Jenin, in Tulkarem, in Nablus, in Khalil, in Gaza, or against the Palestinians also outside of Palestine, people in exile that are not allowed to come back to Palestine, which is more than half of our population. So, and I do want to raise an alert and an alarm that we do fear today that after a ceasefire, that there will be an acceleration and escalation of the processes in the West Bank. We already see that the settlers are attacking our people, colonial settlers are attacking our people in unprecedented, since 1948, unprecedented waves, unprecedented actions. They are burning down total communities. There has been over 10 different communities that have been totally displaced from their areas of presence and areas of residence. And these things are only going to increase as long as Israel is enjoying impunity, as long as they do not suffer from sanctions, they do not suffer from energy and arms embargo, they do not suffer from action that is meaningful from the world on boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So yes, unfortunately, it is very alarming, and we do think that things will get worse if action is not is not considered today. And by the way, when we say actions, it's important for the people also to know that for states to take actions, it needs a lot of work, it needs a lot of legal analysis, it needs a lot of economic calculations, and of course it can be done. Like what we are seeing in Colombia and in other places around the world, and of course what we saw and continue to see from the South African government.
Rula, before we go to the break, I know in preparing this conversation, I watched your interview on Al Jazeera. I think it was done 2 days ago, if I stand to be corrected. And the question was asked to you with regards to media complicity in the early days of the genocide. That G word was a taboo in many of the Western media. But when I saw an individual like Piers Morgan using it, I thought, my word, aren't the winds changing? But how much of a complicity has there been given that, number one, Israel has not allowed any media to cover the genocide in Gaza, and number two, the amount of blanking over with regards to the coverage of it and the propaganda that was, of course, being dished out. Surely there has to be a role within the media, given that they've really not seen the truth. And it's only taken up until this week to understand the starvation that is happening in Gaza right now, for them to get a full picture of it.
I think I would go ahead and say that the media in the global majority is way more professional than the media in the so-called mainstream global minority countries, the United States and Europe. I cannot say that the media coverage of the Western states has been professional. It has not been based on facts. It has not been based on centering the people, the survivors, and the victims of the genocide, which is not journalism. So it is again a very clear indicator that the system of the West is collapsing because it is only exporting ideas of hegemony, ideas of the big brother controlling, brainwashing the people into thinking something that is not. And we always also spoke to some journalists, brave, ethical, and professional journalists in those big mainstream media, and they were afraid to cover stories as they are. They were afraid, they were intimidated, and they were even, some of them, we have heard of people being paid to cover certain stories in a certain manner. So is this a coverage of media? Is this something we can rely on? The answer is no. So I do not think that they have become way much better. I think the reason why a little bit of more coverage has been seen is because there are alternative medias and there is social media that is showing something that is way that has a big discrepancy of what we are seeing in the mainstream media, and hence the little bit of change. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, there was this statement from 4 major media outlets, including the BBC, the AFP, and so on. And they were talking about their own journalists in Gaza and how they are suffering starvation. And they did not mention, it was a 3-line statement. And they didn't even mention anything about the Palestinians living a genocide for almost 2 years. And so it is despicable the way they are controlled. And also it is important for us as consumers to understand that when we want to learn about something, we really need to look at media that is independent, media that does not have a very clear political agenda. Of course, everyone does have a political agenda, but at least are they actually doing journalism, or are they moving propaganda and pushing for the Israeli Hasbara?
And of course, I'll add to that by saying not even a mention of the Palestinian journalists that are using their phones and other media to go ahead and cover the genocide. After the break, we're going to be touching on the starvation and the famine that continues to occur in Gaza. When will that line be drawn by the international community to say enough is enough? Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. Rula, as we see the starvation and the famine occurring in Gaza, it takes it sometimes leaves you with no words when you see what mothers have to go through, what fathers have to go through, what, of course, the children have to go through. And I just wanted to get your take on it, because sometimes one needs to, it's difficult to step back and just look at it and ask yourself, how did we get here? But we got here because, as we mentioned in the previous segment, this impunity, the fact that it's not only Israel blocking it, but we got footage of settlers within the Kir border who are stopping the trucks from going. And that in itself speaks to where humanity has really lost it, especially when you're looking from an Israeli perspective, that you have these pockets of people that are willing to make sure that they are doing their bit for its government to starve the people of Gaza.
Again, it is a method of war. It is an act of genocide. Forced starvation is definitely that. And the Israelis, because of the enjoyment of impunity, and because of the complicity of the world, so it is not only the Israelis who are forcibly starving our people to death and creating the humanitarian aid spots that have been militarized, of course, by the United States, and that's a very dangerous precedent, by the way, created them into death traps. We are seeing unprecedented actions happening in Palestine. And yes, our people are literally not only suffering from the bombardment and the continuous extreme attack on everything in Gaza, but also we are seeing the Israeli colonizer putting our people in every single category of a genocide and every single part of a genocide to kill as many people as possible, especially before a ceasefire, and especially because there is nothing that, even as I said before, our neighboring countries, unfortunately, the governments are not taking measures to stop this insanity. So yes, unfortunately, the pain, I would say, is chronic.
You know,
Seeing those, yes.
yeah, I just wanted to bring in, listening to Tariq Abu Azzoum, who's, of course, Al Jazeera journalist, who's based in Deir al-Balah, and he says, malnutrition is unmistakably rampant across Gaza, specifically amongst children under the age of 5. This GHF, who, of course, and you mentioned about aid being militarized, the fact that this is being done, and yet we are still asked to believe that Israel and America are allowing aid to go on, and it's backed up by many of the analysts, which of course support this GHF. This specific organization, it's quite clear, isn't it, that you're going to die by starvation, number one, or if you want aid, you're going to do so, but you're going to do so with blood on your face, or you aren't going to make it home with that aid. And that is probably the worst signs of a genocide that we've ever seen before, isn't it, Rula?
Yes, I mean, the militarization of aid is a very, very dangerous situation. And we have been warning of this, and also seeing the inefficiency, to be honest, of many UN organizations not being even allowed, pressuring states to enter Palestine with the aid that is needed to actually save lives, tells us again about the system, tells us again that if we allow this to happen, we're also creating precedents for the world. And I cannot stress this enough, that it is precedents to the world that we see, and this is also another way of dominance that we're seeing in Palestine. To militarize humanitarian aid is another political also interest, colonial interest in the region. This is not separable from the bigger colonial picture. And it is very important that in states, of course, now that we are going to see the New York meeting very soon, this is one of our recommendations to states participating in those discussions, that stop and refrain and immediately reverse any attempts and the continuous attempts to militarize humanitarian aid, because this is a very filthy political colonial game that we understand, and that we call for its stop and its reverse immediately.
Rula, before we go to the break, I want to speak on the line that the international community now needs to draw with Israel. We've been seeing statement among statements. There was an elderly lady in Gaza, and you could look into the pain in her eyes and the pain in her words, saying, we don't want words, we want action. And this is what's needed, isn't it? Because as long as words are being thrown to Israel, they're going to look at it, they're going to smell. Heck, they're even going to go ahead and laugh at it, because they've understood right now that nobody can do them anything, given that this impunity that they enjoy. Rula Shadid, from your perspective, when does that line get drawn? Is the international community, especially the West, and most notably the United States, going to say enough is enough, because this starvation and famine cannot continue?
I think the government by itself will not say enough is enough. As I have said earlier, this is their project as well. Without their weapons, this will not happen. So they're definitely part of this genocide. But if we continue to see a lot of pressure around the world, if we continue to see other states in the global majority, which are now more relevant in this, what I have been referring to as a parallel system that we need to see, if they start seeing that there are other blocks that are becoming, that are shaping and forming a new set of policies that are action-based, then maybe this will put pressure on the United States and on Israel to stop this genocide. And here I would like to mention that there are several blocks and attempts, but the most significant one is what we have just seen in Bogota, the conference and the Hague Group that has just come out with 6 different recommendations, and the statement is out there and people can take a look at it, but also the inclusion of more states than the initial number of states which inaugurated the entire initiative in January this year. And there is a lot to be done with this group because it is action oriented. So it is not a group that is going to introduce a political solution that is basically based on unrealistic needs and unrealistic and even unsolicited opinions, like the one that is now being introduced from the French government and that is going to take place in 2 days in New York. But actually the Hague Group is one that is calling for very clear action specifically related to arms embargo, to stopping the vessels that are carrying arms to Israel, and many action-oriented steps. So that is where I think we will have to focus our intention. We will not wait, and we are not waiting for the United States or Europe to take action and suddenly wake up with conscience and say, oh, we have been wrong and we want to. There's nothing in the world that will be able to replace the pain or return the people that have lost their lives in resistance of the colonizer and the colonization of Palestine.
After the break, I'll wrap up my conversation with Rula Shadid. We're going to be taking the conversation forward with regards to the Hague Group. Do stay tuned to News in Focus. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm wrapping up my conversation with the co-director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy, Rula Shadid. Rula, I want to touch on the 6 measures, but one of the important ones, of course, the universal jurisdiction mandate, which allows states or international bodies to prosecute serious international crimes regardless of where they took place. This is a step in the right direction, isn't it, in terms of making sure that international law is preserved, even though, of course, you have a nation like Israel, which, quite frankly, does not take it seriously. This is a way, isn't it? And the only way for this to happen, as mentioned in the statement, is to try and make sure that more nations, especially those from the West, are part of this group.
Definitely. So as we said earlier, international law and laws in general are tools. The way of using it is, if you politicize it or not, is then when we see them effective or not. So in support of the universal jurisdiction, it means that even if the person is not a national of a certain country, the perpetrator, states can actually take judicial action against those individuals, and it is very important, and we are seeing it grow now for states to utilize their national laws as well in ensuring that their own communities are safe from war criminals. I don't think that any state or any citizens around the world would want to have Israeli war criminals and genocide enablers and genocide actors to be walking around their children, their families, their societies. So it is very important action indeed. And of course, we have seen universal jurisdiction, by the way, being, there was an attempt of accelerating the use of it in 2009 and around those years in Europe specifically. But very interestingly, we have immediately seen a change in the laws that makes it difficult, especially after the case of Tzipi Livni in the United Kingdom, to use universal jurisdiction in Europe. So even there, we have seen very clear demands and actions and a doctrine from the Israeli colonialists around the world pressuring and intimidating and dictating to states not to use universal jurisdiction. And this also shows that this is a tool that can be effective if used in a proper manner.
Rula, I want to take a quote, obviously, from somebody you know quite well, Dr. Francesca Albanese, and we spoke of her earlier on. She says, quote unquote, Palestine has already triggered a revolution and you are part of it. She was, of course, addressing the Hague Group. And she says that Palestine has changed global consciousness, drawing a clear line between those who oppose genocide and those who accept it or are part of it. And of course, this comes at the same time when she released a report of a number of multinationals and conglomerates who had, of course, been part of the genocide and assisting Israel in the part of the genocide. Again, this shows that it's not just coming from, it's actually not coming a lot from governments, but it's mostly coming from civic society organizations and individuals like yourself. I want to touch on civic society and, of course, including your group, the role that it has played, and including, the normal men and women on the street who are taking these protests forward. In South Africa, for example, every day in the city of Cape Town, there are protests, whether it's one person or 1,000 people. That pressure is needed, isn't it? Because only then will there be an international or a start of an international condemnation towards Israel, like what we saw in South Africa, of course, when apartheid was at its highest.
Definitely, the civic space or civil society, specifically for Palestine, is a very important element in our liberation movement, because as maybe your audiences knows, but civil society has been operating even before the creation of the Palestinian Authority, because there was no Palestinian Authority. And then when there was a Palestinian Authority, unfortunately operating under the auspices and operating under the grip of the colonizer, their ceiling is very, very low. So who can do the work? Who can do the research? Who can give information and give information that can be used for states to take informed decisions? It is actually the civil society, and that's why it goes maybe beyond being the civil society specifically, that also your audience need to know that in Palestine, we did not have elections for the past 16 years. Palestinian Authority is not a legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. We do not have a parliament, and hence there hasn't been any healthy political life that would include the big amount of excellence within our Palestinian experts that are now working in the civil society to move the Palestinian cause forward and to create momentums and to create allies and relationships, not only with the global majority governments, but also, and most importantly, to reintroduce and revive the intersectional struggles and the meaning of how intersectional struggles are the key forward, because Israel is not the only colonizer in Palestine. Israel, unfortunately, is being the oppressor in many other countries as well, with its relations, with its allies. We see how much Israel is infiltrated and involved in so many cases and situations against the indigenous people, against the people in Latin America, against the people in African countries, and so on. So it is not solidarity what we are calling for. It is actually joint action, because our colonizer and the interest of our oppressors are one.
Rula, the group has set a deadline for September the 20th for others to participate. We're just under 2 months for that to happen. And of course, a date chosen to coincide with the start of the UN General Assembly. What we have seen, of course, at the UN General Assembly is quite a unanimous vote to try and make sure not only a ceasefire is brought up, but the question with regards to the accountability that Israel needs to answer for in terms of its genocide right now in Gaza, and of course what we're seeing in the occupied West Bank. How confident are you by the 20th of September that something tangible will happen? One could say that what we're seeing right now with regards to the starvation and the famine in Gaza, there may be an awakening of the conscience, as Dr. Francesca Albanese had mentioned. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Unfortunately, the Palestinians have been repeatedly hearing about resolutions. Majority of votes are voting for the resolutions on whether it is the ceasefire today or the ending of occupation in 1967. So we have plenty of resolutions. There is no need for more procedures and legal recommendations and political recommendations. There's a lot of those. And of reports, there is no lack of ideas. What there is lack of is states taking steps. There are many states that are very afraid, and this again is showing that there really needs to be a change where blocks comes together, states create blocks to actually take collective action that can mean something to the Palestinian people, but also to the world. Because again, when we see this collapse in the system, this gives a very clear message to the entire world that the system is only operating and serving specific people and specific skin color and specific agendas. And this is not, and we are not included in those sessions. Now, another thing that is very important, if those conferences are going to come out with saying that they are supporting the recognition of Palestine or the two-state solution, this means that there is a big failure, and again, yet a way of trying to circumvent and the real issue here and the root causes of the situation, which is the colonization, which is the current genocide, which is the ongoing atrocities for the past almost 100 years against our people. So we do call on all states to, and the people in those states, to understand that when France, as you started your intervention, or our interview today, you said that there is going to be this recognition. It's very dangerous because it dilutes people from the core issues, which is, how can you just say that you want to recognize the state without recognizing that there is a genocide that is ongoing? What kind of state is going to happen when you have zero control and sovereignty over any part of Palestine? And what kind of state are you calling for when half of your population is exiled and another third of your population is now facing genocide and facing atrocities and systematic killing in entire Palestine, and systematic silencing and ethnic cleansing. So it is very important that these states come out specifically in the upcoming meeting tomorrow and the day after to actually acknowledge that what is needed today is action, and the actions are clear. These are the only things that we saw happening in South Africa that led to a political end of the political apartheid. But also it is very important for us to acknowledge that without the people on the ground and without the mobilization of the people that are not only based on solidarity, as I mentioned earlier, but also based on their recognition of their own rights and their own oppression that they're facing from corporations that are also supporting the colonizer, like the company of Glencore, like the company of Dermont, that are continuing to support colonial Israel with coal, with crude oil, with other energy sources. It is also important to think that without us working together, without the mobilization around the world, states will not feel the heat, and we definitely call upon everyone in the streets to never forget and to never stop calling, acting, and doing action for Palestine.
Rula, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much for having me.
The absolute pleasure. That's Rula Shadid, a co-director of the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy. And as we, of course, end this, keep the prayers for the people of Gaza, not only the people of Gaza, but the people of the occupied West Bank. What will happen over the weekend, we have absolutely no idea. But the voices, the discussions, those are important to go ahead and make sure that the attention is given to that right over there. That's all we have for you here on News in Focus. Do have yourself a good weekend, but most importantly, a safe one. I'll see you again on Monday. For more content, do visit our YouTube channel at Hilaal TV if you have, of course, missed this live broadcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.